I wanted to start by commenting on today's first reading from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Once again, in many of the letters of St. Paul, he's addressing the abuses, the things that are wrong in the communities that he had founded, the communities that he started. And so he, in today's first reading, he is greatly grieved, and he's upset about the fact that they're going to law courts. In other words, they have grievances against one another. And notice how he says that, do you dare to take it to court before the unrighteous instead of taking it before the saints? And there's two reasons as to why St. Paul is addressing this. And the first one may not be very obvious to everyone, but it's a scandal. So in other words, Christians are called to practice love. Christians are called to love one another. So if non-Christians see how Christians live, they're going to be scandalized. Those Christians who are arguing, fighting amongst themselves, they give a bad example. However, the reality is that we all have a fallen human nature, and when we are in interaction with others, there's going to be times when we conflict. It's to be expected. It's natural. It's part of human nature. None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. And the problem is that sometimes these clashes are more intense than they should be, and sometimes people will, take it to a court or something, right? They want a judge to determine, who is right and who is wrong. And it is true that we can be, treated very badly in certain ways. And yes, we do have to speak out against injustice, but we also have to be willing to forgive, especially when it's minor things. But St. Paul acknowledges, okay, there might be cases that are more important. I mean, here he says, and if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to judge trivial cases? So he's referring to trivial cases. But yes, there might be cases that are more of a weightier matter. But even for trivial cases, sometimes people get so upset, so angry, that they might even take it to a court of law. And I mentioned before that, sometimes siblings, I've heard of siblings that don't speak to each other because they're arguing over the inheritance. And that's a lack of charity. There's something clearly wrong there. But notice how he goes on to say, in fact, to have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you. It's already a defeat. You've been defeated. You've been conquered. By whom? By the devil. In other words, you lack charity. Now, of course, every situation is going to be different, so we can't, generalize too much, but the whole point St. Paul is making is, look, you're getting upset over trivial matters. You're getting so upset that you're taking it to a law court. And you're making a big mistake. And then he goes on to say, so after he says it's already a defeat for you, why not rather be wronged? Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud, and believers at that. And then he goes on to talk about, how don't be deceived, certain individuals who won't make it into the kingdom, and he lists off fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, male prostitutes, sodomites, and all these others, and we tend to think, oh, thank goodness I'm not one of those. But it's not a totally exclusive list. But you see, St. Paul is trying to make a point here. And the point he's trying to make is that we are not worthy. We are like these people. Okay, maybe we're not exactly like them, but we are all sinners. In other words, none of us are worthy of the gift of salvation. None of us are worthy of the gift of faith. It's a free gift that has been given to us. And we should rejoice in that, but instead we're focused on the things of this world. We're being nitpicky, and we're saying, well, this person wronged me this way and that person wronged me that way, and I'm going to take them to court. We're fighting the wrong battles. The battle is within ourselves. The battle is against our own sinful inclinations. It's not against the people around us. Sure, we need to speak out against injustice when injustice does happen. But as St. Paul points out, we are also ones who wrong others and defraud others. So why should we get upset when we are wrong, when we are defrauded? Don't we do the same? And sometimes we have a hard time acknowledging that we do the same. There's that saying that when you point a finger, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. And so many spiritual authors make that statement. The faults we see in others, we have those faults in ourselves. We are just not willing to acknowledge it. And so the whole point is, well, if we do the same as others, how dare we bring them to court to demand justice? So St. Paul says, okay, well, if you have a real case, a real issue, okay, well, bring it to the saints. Well, who are the saints? Well, the church. It refers to all the Christians, the Christian community. It could refer to the leaders. Does that mean they will always get, totally just judgment? Well, maybe not, but the ideal is that the saints, if they are close to God, that hopefully they will see things clearly and to be able to make the right decision regarding the situation. And so that brings us to the importance of prayer, which is kind of alluded to in today's gospel reading. We see our Lord, whenever he had to undergo some major event in his life, he always spends time in prayer. And in this case, he calls the disciples to himself, and of the many disciples that he has, he chooses 12. Now, he knew which ones he were going to choose, but he spent the night in prayer to teach us to pray before important decisions in our lives, to pray before, big events in our lives. So he's teaching us the importance of prayer. And notice also at the end how it mentions that all the crowd were trying to touch him, for power came out from him and healed all of them. And so the crowds draw close to our Lord. And the reality is that when we draw close to our Lord, we begin to see ourselves as we really are. And as I mentioned before regarding St. Catherine of Siena, one of the greatest saints, St. Catherine of Siena, if you're not familiar with her life, she's an extremely great saint, very, very close to God. And during her lifetime, at one point, our Lord, enabled her or gave her, asked for anything, basically. And she asked to be able to see herself as she really is. So she asked our Lord to see herself as she really is. And she said it was the most mortifying experience she ever experienced. And she had many terrible experiences, but this was the most mortifying, and it was the most humiliating, because she saw herself in the light of God as she really is in comparison to God, to the perfect love of God, compared to her human weaknesses, compared to her flawed love of her fellow man. And this is a great saint, St. Catherine of Siena, already at the height of sanctity. And the whole point is she too was blind to this reality. And in like manner, so can we be blind to the reality that we also offend the people around us or do the very same things that we point fingers at others. And unfortunately, we tend to treat them very harshly, but we tend to excuse ourselves. But we don't excuse others. We want to take them to court sometimes, as St. Paul says. So we need to draw close to God in prayer. We need to examine ourselves. We need to examine our conscience. And yes, we need to strive to be a good example to those around us. We should not cause scandal. Now recall that passage of our Lord. If anyone should scandalize one of these little ones, it would be better for that individual to have a millstone tied around his head and to be cast into the sea. Now, what he's referring to exactly by that scandal, I don't know, but the church does talk about the fact that we can cause scandal. And so we should try to be the best example we are, especially to those who might be observing us and wondering, oh, well, what is Christianity really like? Here's an example. Here's a Christian, someone who claims to be a Christian. Okay, what are we like? I'm sure that we should all acknowledge, or hopefully acknowledge, that we all fall short of being the way that we are called to be. And acknowledging that is good, because if we can acknowledge it for others, we can acknowledge that others fall short also. And if we can acknowledge that, we can have the humility to say, okay, well, he or she makes falls or does things wrong. Well, so do I. And it makes it so much easier to forgive, to live in peace, to live in harmony.